Chi-Town, yeah.
Drama.
What?
Purchase your tracks today.
Saludos. Otra vez, it's your old school host, Gabe Morales, continuing our coverage of Chicago gangs. La Raza means the people in Spanish more than it does a literal translation, which would be the race. It was a term that was very popular in the 1960s by Chicanos, often used as Viva la Raza in slogans, meaning long live the people. La Raza can be a gang, but one must be careful not to lump all La Raza gangs together. Most are regional and have no national ties to each other. For instance, there is a La Raza XIV in Yakima, Washington, La Raza in Los Angeles, La Raza Unida in Texas, La Gran Raza in the Southeast and East Coast, and La Raza in Chicago, and none of them are connected. La Raza comes from a time when Mexican nationals were often referred to as being brazzers or braceros, which was a sanctioned U.S. government program from 1942 to 1964 to bring in more Mexicans to fill a labor shortage in the United States. Another gang that is often confused with La Raza are the brazzers. It is easy to see why some people confuse them. I mean, look at their gang sweaters and how much they look alike. And they use the same colors of the Mexican flag, red, white, and green. The Brazzers also started out in the southwest side of Chicago, near the intersection of 19th. At the time, Pilsen was mostly inhabited by Mexican Americans, also referred to as Chicanos, and the Mexican national kids were often picked on and bullied, even beaten and robbed. These youths finally got sick and tired of being harassed by the Latin counts, bishops, and other gangs, so they formed groups to protect each other. At first, the braceros or brazzers were not a street gang, but more of a party crew, but they would fight alongside each other if they needed to, and soon got into fights with neighborhood gangs, which eventually dragged them into gang activity. It is said at first the brazzers initially refused to use guns. They instead wanted to fight with fists and go head up because it was more honorable and tougher. Unlike a similar gang, La Raza, the early brazzers were tight with the Ambrose gang, which even led to the brazzers adopting the spear as a symbol, which was an idea they took from the Ambrose spear symbol. And it showed some unity between brazzers and Ambrose. But La Raza were always mortal enemies of Ambrose, and still are today. I heard some of these brazzers in the early 1980s also ran with party people, Morgan Deuces, and the Racine Boys, but I don't know how true that is. Lots of people talk. I like to see some hard proof, not just one picture or one piece of evidence, but several. This is how I validate information. By the 1980s, it is said the brazzers realized there's too much gang competition in Pilsen, and so they packed up and left the area to an uptown neighborhood at the intersection of Sunnyside and Hazel. Tarzan took on the leadership of these news brazzers. Although most of the Hispanic residents in uptown were Puerto Rican, the brazzers scooped up mainly Mexican national youths that lived in the area, the outsiders. It is said that the brazzers fought the Latin kings, as well as the Gaylords, which were a predominantly white gang, and the Vice Lords, which were predominantly a black gang. On encountering these enemies, the brazzers found that several local gangs had some of the same enemies, such as the Latin Stylers, Simon City Royals, and Black Gangster Disciples. It is said in 1981 the brazzers joined the Folk Nation. The brazzers' turf grew around Chase Park, and they fought vicious turf wars with People Nation gangs during the 1980s and 90s. This also happened to be the time period when Ronald Reagan was elected and Bush Sr. followed him. There were federal government crackdowns on illegal immigration that was growing out of control. So many of the brazzers were deported, and the dwindling Pilsen chapter was defunct by the early 1990s, leaving that area to La Raza and other gangs. I hear at some point brazzers went to war with fellow folks such as Spanish Cobras and Ashland Vikings, and eventually they withdrew from most areas. I'm interested in hearing from some of you if they have totally died out or merged with other gangs. While the Blousers were fading and hardly heard of anymore, a similar gang was growing. La Raza were also children of many of these bracero workers in the Chicago area. But while their parents were documented or undocumented immigrants, many of their children were American born, even though they were babies. Thus, they could not be deported. What happened to the Blousers and La Raza happened to many Mexican American or Chicano youth in other cities, who often did the same thing by joining gangs as protection. So to say that this did not happen is very unlikely. I am a fourth generation Mexican American, and I was born in 1960, and I saw it personally with many kids in the 60s and 80s that I grew up with on the West Coast. And I ran with a party crew called Vatos Locos that had no connections to other groups that took on the same name, especially after a movie called Blood In, Blood Out, loosely based on the life of my mentor, Robert Moco Morel, came out in 1993. After that, Vatos Locos gangs blew up all over the United States. Like Vatos Locos, La Raza is just a common term adopted by many kids. So it can be a gang or it might not. Like I said, you have to be really careful. Many of the Mexican kids in Chi-Town in the late 1970s were bullied by local gangs like the Bishops, Latin Counts, and Latin Kings. Here you see a La Raza graffiti piece in the early 1980s dissing the Counts and Kings by putting their heads upside down. These La Raza youth banded together under the direction of Pico, Ruben, and Bones, who adopted much of their style from local gangs, but using their own colors. The name La Raza was chosen along with Mexican flag colors because they felt they were showing pride from the country from which they came from. Here you see one of the La Raza vets, Boney, wearing a La Raza sweater with the colors of the flag, green, red, and white. The Chicago version of La Raza was founded in the late 1970s in the Lower West Side neighborhood around 17th and Carpenter or 17th and Racine, depending on who you ask. Some rival gangs in the neighborhood were upset with that name, which, like I said, was also being used by many Chicano Latino youth at the time. But these La Raza youth resisted and decided they would stand alone. Many say that La Raza were a spin-off gang from Party People, and that La Raza were just some Mexican youth that hung out Dvorak Park by Cullerton, Racine, and they just wanted to party too, but they're often rejected as being wetbacks. They were harassed at school and after school by gangs fighting over that territory. Whatever the case of their early associations, they decided that they would start their own gang and call themselves La Raza. Besides using the flag or la bandera of green, white, and red, some of their other symbols included a Pachuca cross. And by 1980, they started using the 6-point star of the Folk Nation. Although La Raza is affiliated with Folk Nation, they have also been at war with many Folk Nation gangs. And as I've said in previous videos, this is not uncommon. They have fought with Ambrose, Gangster Disciples, as well as other folk gangs. It is said that La Raza joined the Folk Alliance under the sponsorship of the 2-6 gang from the Little Village. La Raza did not adopt the moniker gangster like Party People did. Instead, they adopted the Insane family. In addition to fighting with Latin Kings, Latin Counts, Ambrose, and other gangs, they have also battled with the Almighty Saints, who will be covered in a future episode. The first real documentation of La Raza is in about 1982, when a member named Martin was gunned down. And this is when they formed more from a crew into a gang. After the killings of Mondo Snake in 1984, La Raza became more unified. And then there was the killing of Micobrio, who was one of the founders in 1984, who was killed by Racine Street Latin Counts. This made La Raza more determined than ever to defend themselves.
In Chicago, it happened again last night. Kids shooting kids, gangs fighting gangs. This time, 3 boys were shot at a hot dog stand and a 15-year-old died. Almost 70 killings this year have been tied to gang violence in Chicago.
They mark their territory with bold symbols. They defend it with violence.
You should know that as soon as you join the gang, you know that one of these days you could get shot or killed.
This year in Chicago, more than 65 people have been killed in gang fights.
These kids are killing each other out there, and we're not going to ignore that fact anymore.
The whole city's in a gang war. You wait like for the trouble to come to us, and then we take care of it.
In 1985, La Raza expanded into the back of the yards community, and Beto was the founder of the 48th Street La Raza branch, located near 48th and Laughlin. By 1988, there was a news article stating that they were, in fact, a gang. They may have made the news that year because that's when they went to war with Ambrose, who had gained territory in many parts of the greater Chicago area throughout the 1960s and 80s, and bumped heads with La Raza. By 1990 or so, the war with Ambrose died out, but would resume by the mid-90s. At Cullerton and Loomis, La Raza was operating close to the 2-2 boys, but then 2-2 boys and 2-6 went to war, and La Raza stayed aligned with the 2-6. So La Raza had a war with 2-2 boys by the end of 1986. And many gangs in the area were at odds, as explained in the Ambrose, 2-2 boys, Satan Disciples, and 2-6 videos found on this channel. In the late 1980s, La Raza continued to grow, and they were implicated in more and more shootings and acts of violence, whether in the Pilsen area or other areas of the greater Chicago area. La Raza remained strong in Pilsen between 19th Street and 21st, and from Loomis to Racine. They continued to operate from 47th and 49th, from Ashland down to Racine. They also had a faction in the Gage and Marquette Park areas between 57th Street to 62nd Street and to Fairfield. Eventually, La Raza opened up some turf at 50th and Hoyne and 42nd and Mozart in the Kelly Park area of the Brighton Park neighborhood. About the same time, La Raza opened up a 76th and Ridgeway faction in the Ashburn neighborhood, and even expanded to the north around Clark and Estes, often called the North Pole, the Rogers Park neighborhood. La Raza made their way into the Hermosa neighborhood in northwest side at Harding and Wabansia, called DK Town, and they flourished in that section that spread from Cortland to Kedville. In the early 1990s, La Raza would move out in the suburbs of Streamwood, Rockford, Carpentersville, and to Cicero at the 14th and 49th Grant Work section, where many other gangs also operated. By the early 1990s, 2-2 boys from Cicero, who originally operated at 14th and 49th and stayed there for about 10 years, started beefing with La Raza, who had expanded into that area. This kicked off a major war. Here's a poster made by a Cicero La Raza gang member depicting their enemies. Although La Raza had disagreements and fights with party people, they still remained aligned at times, with periods of war and peace. They beefed with them by 1980, and that lasted into the mid-80s. But they were cool with party people at the McKinley and Sherman Park areas by 1987, as this joint picture shows. They're also cool with the Gage Park G-Town party people, when they were founded in 1990 by Sir Little A.K., his brother Stoney, their cousin Slim, and an Irish guy named Weddle, as well as a few others. But then their ties with the Gage Park party people erupted when a few La Raza from 61st and Fairfield, like Burrito and Flaco, flipped party people, which caused La Raza members to confront the Gage Park party people faction and Sir Little A.K. Then Chief from La Raza at 61st and Fairfield went to complain to all the gang leaders for Chiefs of La Raza on 18th Street, which resulted in a confrontation with party people over on 18th. Party people felt disrespected by this act. He then visited party people at 17th and May to complain, when party people pulled out a shotgun and shot him in the chest, killing him. And then it was pretty much outright war from that point on. Eventually, La Raza left the 61st and Fairfield area after many deaths on both sides. Then some Ambrose jumped a member of La Raza, according to a court case, the People versus Martin Quiros. And it mentions that Quiros and Jose Anaya shot and killed an Ambrose member named Jesus Sanchez. Throughout the 1990s, La Raza fought several vicious and bloody gang wars, yet they continued to multiply and spread to other areas of the city. They were going to jail and prison in increasing numbers, such as Beto from La Raza. They remained close allies with the 2-6 until they had a turf dispute in 1998 over by 42nd and Mozart. This was 2-6 territory, and La Raza was taking money from the drug business. So they went to war for about a year until a truce was called, mainly because both gangs were having issues with the Saints. La Raza agreed to leave that territory and put more of their people on 48th Street, as well as to keep relations good with 2-6. Both 2-6 and La Raza had major cartel connections, and they didn't want to mess that up. They both were making too much money. Cortland and Kedville was left behind as they moved more into the Harding and Wabansia area. Eventually, due to police suppression, they left Carpenters and had been pushed out of a few other areas. But for every area they moved out of, they moved into 2 more. In 2017, the Raza members pointed to 2 of their own as shooting at 2 plainclothes Chicago police officers. It was felt they did this mostly to keep the pressure off the gang. Like I said, they were making too much money in drug sales, and they didn't need additional heat. Everyone in the gang knew that these guys did not shoot at rival gang members. They shot at officers, said Chicago Police Commander Brendan Beanihan. At that point, these individuals cooperated with us. We were able to identify the driver and the shooter. We were able to arrest the driver of the van, and he confessed to what he had done and was charged as an adult. They were still looking for the shooter at the time of that press conference, and he was later found. The driver, Angel Gomez, aged 18 at the time, was charged with 2 counts of attempted murder and aggravated battery with a firearm. The undercover officers were investigating an earlier gang-related shooting when La Raza gang members shot into the back of their van. Police were trying to put down gang violence after at least 3 dozen shootings happened in early 2016 in the back of the yards and Brighton Park areas. The weapons of choice, AR-15s and AK-47s. At that time, 46 people had been shot, 13 of them fatally. And the gangs names that were at war were La Raza, Mighty Saints, Saint Disciples, and Gangster 2-6. In 2018, a 17-year-old La Raza gang member was accused with a shooting in the summer of 2017 in the back of the yards. Christopher Villagomez left his house when he and a shooter armed themselves with an AR-15 style rifle. They then drove a stolen green sedan to the corner of 48th Street and Winchester Avenue. The shooter stepped from the sedan, and Villagomez parked near an alley, pointed the rifle towards 24-year-old Christian Rodriguez, and started shooting. Villagomez was arrested and admitted that he was dispatched by La Raza gang leaders. As many La Raza gang members are Mexican nationals, they can easily slip across the border before police can nab them. And so the gang will often use the Mexican national kids to missions. Just like other gangs, the females do a lot of work to back up the males, and a lot of the fights are over females. As you probably noticed by now, a lot of these gang feuds are over petty reasons, acts of disrespect or perceived acts of disrespect. Hundreds, maybe even thousands, have been wounded and killed in these attacks. So come on, gente, put the weapons down. Quit hurting toda la raza and do something productive with your lives. Be really proud to be a Mexican. Go to school, go to college, or at least trade school. Join the military and get some real discipline. Find out where you really fit in. Make your padres, your parents, proud. Don't hurt them by having them bury another son lost to senseless gang violence. Thanks once again to ChicagoGangHistory.com for your well-done research on these gangs. Don't forget to purchase your copy of Chicago-Based Gangs, Beyond Folks and People, written by myself and Joe Sparks, retired Chicago Police Department gang detective. Our book can be purchased on Amazon.com and other platforms, and it can be ordered from any major bookstore. As always, please take care of each other and stay safe. Until next time, this is Gabe Morales signing off. Gangsters, cops, and politicians.